archery tournament. Old Rob could win that standing on his head, huh, Rob?
Thank you, Little John. But I'm sure we're not invited.
No, but there's somebody who'll be very disappointed if you don't come. She's gonna give a kiss to the winner.
Kiss to the winner.
Archers, to your mark!
Aye, archers, to your mark!
And may the lucky arrow find its target.
If you shoot half as good as you blabbermouth, you're better than Robin Hood.
Robin Hood, he says. Wowee. I'm tip-top all right, but I'm not as good as he is.
Well, that's just grand now, isn't it? Guess who's coming to dinner?
I am Merida, firstborn descendant of Clan Dunbrog, and I'll be shooting for my own hand.
Hello, my name is Malferon, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be featuring a list I'm very excited to share for Set 12, Disney Lorcana Wilds Unknown Archery class, which brings together two unlikely partners in Robin Hood and Merida. Featured on the cover here are two new cards coming in Set 12. We'll be exploring them in a lot more detail. Below is going to be shortcuts for if you are wanting to primarily check out the deck list or jump around. And they will also be detailed, time-stamped in the description. However, if you are new, returning, or even if you have any sort of unfamiliarity with Sapphire Steel, I would highly recommend watching the entire video from beginning to end. I think that you will get a lot of insight that you may not have even been anticipating that will really unlock the deck for what it is, what it's trying to be, and set you up for the most success and the most fun. This is a really fun list. And so, without any further ado, let's dive right in. So, as all my videos, I like to start with an outline. Here, we're going to go into some introductory comments. We'll be talking about the feature cards and highlighting the new ones from Set 12, Wilds Unknown. I'll show you the deck list, explain portions of the deck list, talk about tech slots. Now, a tech, remember, is a card that is specifically designed to approach a specific situation or an opponent's deck style. And so that'll be certain swap outs that you could consider. We'll be talking about the Mulligan, which is the early part of the game, or the hand sculpting part of the game, where you'll have to change what's in your hand, what you want to send back, what you want to keep, and the types of hands that will set you up for success. We'll be talking about matchups and give an example of some play lines. And then we'll end with some concluding thoughts. So, introduction, Archery class. What really sets it apart from, one, other Sapphire Steel decks, but also other decks and color combos in general? The premier sort of advantage to this deck is that it provides a multitude of ways to unleash oppressive removal. There is a Sonic Boom shell here, and Sonic Boom is another Sapphire Steel list that utilizes Ariel Sonic Warrior that gets the ability to, every time you sing a song, to spend 2 ink to do 3 damage. So it uses a lot of the core of that build and expands on it to really become something of its own. It incorporates the new Merida, Formidable Archer, a new Steel Legendary coming in Set 12, that allows all actions to do 2 extra damage by activating her trigger, which means a Hero does Thunderbolt, which would do 4, now would activate Merida to do an extra 2, resulting in 6. And she comes with her other new card, 3 Arrows, which hits 2 targets, 1 for 2, 1 for 1, costing 3 ink, doing more spread multi-damage hitting, and really allows new avenues, new opportunities, and ways to hit the board, hit it hard, hit it wide, and hit it multiple and repetitive times. And so there's no lacking of removal in this deck. It incorporates shift lines again, which is something that Sapphire Steel has really been lacking. The other main deck that has used this successfully has been Detectives. Detectives has a larger breadth of weaknesses and things to be taken advantage of, but this is, a deck like Archery class doesn't have quite as many holes. So we get to utilize Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwood, which was originally released in Into the Inkland Set 3, was reprinted in Fabled Set 9, and kind of went unplayed for a long time, largely because its primary shift line was not reprinted. And we'll talk more about him a little bit later. But to have the return of a shift line, one with a character that is so beloved like Robin Hood, is very exciting, and to have it be a pretty exclusive Sapphire Steel thing is also pretty cool too. And we use good use of Robin Hood in this list. Because we are now able to utilize shift lines, we have a large breadth of flexible openings and curves. Now, a curve is sort of the turn-by-turn progression of building your game state, right? And so, if you have 1 ink, you play a 1 ink thing. If you have 2 ink, you play a 2 ink thing, and that's how you kind of grow your board and your strategy. But by utilizing the 2-4-6 curve, right, which is meaning that you can play a card that inks additional time on turn 2, and then you play a card that inks an additional time on turn 4, which allows you to basically skip an ink every turn, and that card with by doing that on 4 ink is this Cinderella. The deck still allows you full access into these very quick later mid-game or end-game states by being able to play bigger characters faster. But because we now have the Robin Hood line, we are able to ramp in different ways. Ramp meaning inking additionally. And we're able to pressure board earlier. We're able to sing earlier. And so it really keeps opponents on their toes, not knowing exactly what you're going to do. And it's even possible to bait openers, like put out an early Robin Hood and actually not shift and just commit to your Cinderella line, which then really frustrates people, but also makes it harder to just plan for what you're going to do. Whereas for the last couple sets now, most Sapphire Steel decks kind of just want to do 2-4-6 Cinderella, and so planning for a Sapphire Steel deck was pretty easy until now. Set 12 introduces a new card called Casa Madrigal Courtyard and allows for location pressure. In a card that's 1 inkable, 2 very strong in by itself, and 3 pretty frustrating to deal with, 7 willpower. And so there was another 2 lore location in Treasure Mountain, which was 1 5 cost and 2 uninkable, and had 9 willpower, sure, but its uninkability really just eliminated its practicality in most deck lists. And so having Casa Madrigal introduced allows a new win condition that for the last couple sets has not really been accessible to Sapphire Steel. And then the consistency of the deck really shines compared to a lot of Sapphire Steels. The big joke in Sapphire Steel is that its biggest enemy is itself, right? You will brick, the uninkable counts tend to be pretty high in most Sapphire Steel lists. You are very dependent on finding ramp on turn 2 or finding Cinderella, and if you don't, you kind of just fall apart. This deck list really ventures to, smooth out a lot of your openings, and there's a lot of ways to get to your mid and end game plans, right? And so why Robin Hood, right? What's the big deal about this guy? So 1, he's just a beloved character. I mean, look at this guy, dude. What a champion of the people. Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwood, is a very cool shift line, right? So he's a 5 cost. He shifts on 3, and set 12 introduced the new 1-drop Robin Hood, the 1/3. We'll give a little more details on him soon. He's got really, really strong stats for a 5 cost. 3/6 quest for 2 on a 5 cost body is pretty chunky. He freezes boards, especially early if you shift him on 3 ink, because when he banishes a character in a challenge, he gains 2 lore. And the other thing that feels always really bad about him as your opponent is, one, it never feels good to ink an opponent's shifted character, right? If you use like Let It Go or Hades, or giving them 2 ink. But 2, getting rid of Robin Hood in a challenge also doesn't feel great either, because you're giving them a card draw. So even when he's like getting removed from the board, he's giving you a card in most case scenarios, which feels pretty good. And then, the other very relevant thing in Sapphire Steel is that he's just a chunky singer, right? And so a lot of the shift lines and detectives, notably, are very strong, but they're very fragile. Almost all of them have 4 willpower, with the exception of Daisy Duck. And so, again, to reintroduce a shift line that is very sticky, meaning that it's very hard to get rid of, is very, very valuable. And so, historically, Robin Hood actually saw most of his play in Amber Steel. So, pre-rotation, so set 8 and before, so before Fabled set 9 was around, he was extremely commonly used in Amber Steel Steel Songs, which was probably at the height during set 4 was a lot of his use. You would commonly see a line like this, where you would do the 1-drop Robin Hood, and here Beloved Outlaw was his primary shift target, where it was a 2/2 1-drop that costed for 1. You would usually play like another singer, like Ursula, Vanessa on turn 2, and then you'd shift Robin Hood. You could sing Zeus with Robin Hood, you could sing A Whole New World with Robin Hood, and do a lot of like really strong and oppressive things. Now, in Sapphire Steel, he wasn't as commonly done. The most common area that Robin Hood found use in was in the Kiwi Birds build. Now, Kiwi Birds was a build designed by Jack Shadows and Harlan Sweet in around late set 6, really found itself in early set 7. Where Robin Hood was utilized. It's an aggro build. Aggro meaning that it's a build that tries to quest early, quest fast, and close the game quickly. And so he was used as a good 1-drop that had a really strong follow-up on turn 3, freezing the board, establishing presence, and then questing out freely while you're establishing your other big questers and your bodyguards. He also allowed like an early singer. The deck didn't use a lot of singers, but he also allowed a form of card draw if he would get banished, with an aggro deck is actually pretty powerful. Right. And so a common follow-up to him would be slamming down a Micduck Manor, which is kind of the older version of Casa Madrigal. It's a 4-cost inkable card that gained 2 lore every turn at 9 willpower, and then or like an Alice Savvy Sailor, right, which is kind of the core of a Kiwi Birds build, which gives ward and bonus lore to a character on quest. So outside of that, Robin Hood wasn't really seen in Sapphire Steel very commonly. The big problems that Robin Hood ran into was that, other decks just kind of got to utilize him a little bit better. Here, whenever you would try to play a Robin Hood and you'd play against other decks, you're trying to think like, well, what's kind of the catch, right? And so many other decks had answers to him so early that, trying to use him as an alternate to your ramp lines, right, like establishing your Fishbone Quill or Sail the Azurite Sea or Tipo to kind of get to your end game faster. He would function as a really good A Whole New World singer. Whole New World, which is a card that allowed you to 5-cost uninkable song that allows you to draw 7 and discard your whole hand and draw 7, both players. So a nice refill. But if he never survived, it was pretty irrelevant. So playing against Steel Song, Amber Steel, which was one of the most common decks of pre-rotation, their very frequent turn 1 was the Cinderella Ballroom Sensation, which she's a 3 singer, right? Which means if you played Robin Hood on the following turn trying to establish your shift line, the next turn she could just play Let the Storm Rage On, which is a 3-cost song that does 2 damage, and they can draw a card, right? So you're not only allowing them to just eliminate your shift line, but then they draw a card, which feels really, really bad. The other one of the most common decks was Emerald Steel, where they would play a 1-drop Diablo, and then next turn shift Diablo by discarding an action, who is a 3-cost, and then immediately have him sing Let the Storm Rage On, and Robin Hood also gets banished and gets eliminated. Even in Red-Purple, right? And Red-Purple in these days is a pretty, well-favored matchup for Sapphire Steel. But even Red-Purple, they would just kind of spam out 1-drops, and if they're going first, if they're on the play, they get to 3 ink first, they could play Brawl, which is a 3-cost action that just allows them to banish a card with 2 strength or less, which is your 1-drop Robin Hood. So even against these red and purple decks, he just wasn't safe, so you never even got to go forward with your shift. even against our brothers, Sapphire Steel, right? Starting in set 7, they could play Popsicle, play Belle, Apprentice Inventor. By banishing an item, you can play this 3-cost character for free. And then next turn, just like Ballroom Sensation Cinderella, she can sing Storm, and then, you know, Robin Hood's dead. So in like almost all relevant matchups, Robin Hood just never had any real opportunity to shine. And even if you got off the shift line, it just never felt as powerful as getting out a faster Hiram by ramping on 2, or establishing Fishbone Quill and getting to your end game with Tomatoes and Tinkerbells and all that other stuff just as fast, right? So Robin Hood never really made a good foothold at Sapphire Steel outside of Kiwi Birds. However, all this stuff is gone. All these relevant openings have been rotated, right? Which really kind of opens the door for Robin Hood to regain some relevance as a legitimate opener. So that's a little kind of an overview of Robin Hood, where he was, where he is. Let's talk about, some of the new toys that we have in set 12 and, why we're giving him another chance. Of course, we have to start with Merida, Formidable Archer, right? And so Merida's so exciting because she's one of the first forms of legitimate damage amplification we've ever seen in Disney Lorcana. She, again, whenever one of your actions deals damage to an opposing character, you deal 2 damage to that character. Now, that's relevant in that you have to be careful with resist. Like if a character has resist 1 and you deal something that does 3 damage, right? So it does 4 damage, it would do 3. It would still activate Merida, but then her trigger would do 1 because you minus the 1. Instead of doing 2, do 1. So it's not turning a 4 damage ability into 6. It's just adding 2 damage after what was already done. So you have to keep that in mind with resist. This also means if something did 1 damage and they have resist, then she does not activate her trigger. You do not get the 2 damage because the 1 damage would do nothing because they resist 1. And so it would do 0 damage. So just keep that in mind whenever you're setting up your boards and plays. It's very relevant, especially in the era of like snow forts. And then her first ability is when you play this character, you may return an action card named 3 arrows from your discard to your hand. We'll talk about 3 arrows here in just a second, but that's extremely powerful. I really underestimated this ability until I play tested it. Being able to recur this action that does damage to 2 targets, and if you have almost always, by definition, Merida on board when you play it, especially because she can retrieve it from the discard, it's doing 2 damage to 1 target, 1 damage to 1 target. But with Merida, it does effectively 4 damage to 1 target and 3 damage to 1 target. That is the equivalent of singing He Hurled His Thunderbolt, which was a 4 damage song, steel song, and then activating an aerial trigger, for 2 ink. So it's effectively the same thing, which is so bonkers. And it's inkable, who'd have thought? She quests for 2. She has 5 willpower, which is very relevant for surviving in a world of He Hurled His Thunderbolts. And then has pretty cool synergy with Ariel because the more you sing with Ariel, you're making the song stronger, but then not only you're getting triggers, the primary song has a higher likelihood of finishing off a target, so you can use your triggers for other targets, which is really, really neat. And then, of course, she's a princess, so she works with Cinderella to gain princess triggers to keep inking at the end of your turns, which is really, really nice. So, of course, we have to talk about 3 arrows. 3 arrows is the new 3-cost action, and that she can retrieve from the discard. It's a multi-target removal, which is already super valuable, right? So a lot of the multi-target action cards in this game are really weird and wonky. Most of them do 2 little damage, right? Which is like Double Trouble, which is a 2-cost action that deals 1 damage to 2 targets. Most of them are kind of strange, like Tug of War, which like allows you to only do damage to like evasives or non-evasives, and that inconsistency just never feels great. The cost of these actions normally doesn't feel amazing as well. And so to have something that feels like halfway decent even early in the game, 2 damage and 1 damage, but the fact that it has this great synergy with Merida where you can keep retrieving it and she just makes this stronger is very, very cool. The other really nice thing about 3 arrows is that it actually offers a play line if you miss ramp on turn 2, like you aren't able to play your Sail, the Azurite Sea, or Tipo, which allows you to ink an additional time on turn 2, to skip turn 3, 3 ink on turn 3, and jump straight to 4 ink on your turn 3. It allows you to then, like the following turn on 3 ink, play this, and get rid of some characters before you get to your 4 ink where you're hopefully playing Cinderella. And so, that's something we haven't really had access to. Nothing really felt great or justified filling up the list to kind of like risk just being like a bad top deck or a bad card later in the game. And so to have something that naturally flows in the deck and provide a halfway reasonable turn is really, really cool. So of course, Robin Hood, our boy, the Desert Wanderer. This art is so good. I love it. You can see his curiosity, his mischievousness, and it's just clean. So he's our new shift target for Champion of Sherwood, who again shifts on 3s, a 5-cost deal. He very relevantly has 3 willpower. So the previous one, right, was 2 and 2, which means he could get he could get banished by that song that's now rotated out, the Storm Rage on. He could get banished by Fire the Cannons. He could get banished by Angel, Experiment 625. And so, to be able to survive a lot of these 2 deal damage cards is very, very helpful. Well, almost guaranteeing his ability to be shifted on when the time would come. And he's got a hero tag, which is kind of nice. Another new card that is featured in the list is What Else Can I Do? This is a 5-cost uninkable song that basically allows the Robin Hood opener to continue the inking and ramping to your mid to late game, and by establishing a big body like Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwood, and to sing and to protect himself and to keep growing your hand, growing your inkwell is very, very powerful. So when you play this action, you let look at the top 2 cards, put 1 in your hand, 1 in your inkwell, right? If it's sang, all your characters gain ward to the start of your next turn. So if a Robin Hood shifts and sings this on curve, right, on like 3 ink, it's almost impossible to get rid of him, which feels pretty nice. Late game actually then functions as a pretty cool win condition by allowing you to close the game by protecting all your characters from things like Hades' or Let It Go's or something else. And it can commonly disrupt what your opponent wants to do as well. Like now they can't move damage counters with Cheshire Cat. If it allows you to make a play by banishing characters and not getting bounced back by Emerald Chromicon. So, this card introduces a lot of flexibility in regards to, progressing your game state, but also like opening up play lines. So what are some of the other feature cards on the list, right? So we talked about Robin Hood. He's our 1-cost. He's our shift line for Big Robin Hood. We have our turn 2 ramps in Tipo and Sail, right? Both of them allow you to ink an additional time on your turn. And these are almost always your preferred card on 2 ink, right? So Tipo allows you to ink any card from your hand. It can be inkable or uninkable, and you do not have to reveal it, but it is exerted. Sail, the Azure at Sea, draws you a card first, right? So it keeps your hand healthy as you're inking, and it does allow you to ink another card. However, that card has to be inkable, and you do have to reveal it. But it is usable ink, right? So, you could play, if you have 1 extra ink, you could play that Robin Hood on the turn you play Sail, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, Cinderella, who is our almost always preferred card when we are on 4 ink, allows you to, at the end of your turn, if you played a princess, which is the same turn that you play her as well, you can ink a card from your hand and then immediately draw a card, so effectively gaining an ink for free. And that card can also be inkable or uninkable. And 3 arrows, right, which we already mentioned. So the mid game commonly will include a lot of our 5-cost characters. This is a 5-cost character heavy deck, right? You have Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwood. We already talked about him. He's gaining lore by banishing. He's very, very chunky at 3/6. He quests for 2. You have Moana, who just improves consistency, allows Cinderella triggers. She allows you to ink your cards from your discard, meaning your 1 card that you get to ink a turn. You can do that from the discard, which just improves your value. She's reasonably strong at 4/4 and quest for 2 and activates Cinderella triggers. We talked about Merida, Formidable Archer, right? She's one of your preferred early play lines if you're able to establish her after Cinderella. And then Pete, Ghost of Christmas Future, who is just a really good card for consistency. He's a draw engine. His effect is, you can boost 1. Boosting means you can pay ink to put the top card from your deck under the card, and whenever he quests, for every card under him, you can look at that many cards on the top of your deck, pick 1, and put it in your hand, which means if he has 3 cards under him, when he quests, you can look at the top 3 cards, pick 1, and put the rest on the bottom, put 1 in your hand. So he's just gaining you cards. He's really annoying to deal with. He's got 5/5, so getting rid of him is very frustrating. And he just allows you to find your songs, find your answers every turn. And if he's not answered quickly, the game is usually over. Tinkerbell Giant Fairy is one of the best 6-cost characters in the game. She's been around since set 1. She was reprinted and fabled set 9. When you play her, you do a 1 damage to everything. 1 damage to all opposing characters, so she just continues to splash that damage. And when you banish a character in a challenge, you can deal 2 damage to another character. So she's a big enforcer on the field, often freezes boards like Robin Hood because they don't want to give her that extra value. Other cards you commonly see in the mid game, you'll be spitting out Strength of Raging Fire, He Hurled His Thunderbolts. These are your primary damage dealing songs. Now the nice thing about Strength of Raging Fire is that it always felt pretty bad singing early, because unlike most decks, we're skipping characters on a lot of turns. Like, you know, we may not play a 1-drop character. We may not play the Robin Hood. 1, if you don't have them, or 2, if you feel like you want to do the Cinderella line. You may not play a character on turn 2 because you may be sailing, which means your first character in some games may only be a Cinderella dream come true. And so singing that strength dealing 1 or even 2 damage if you play another character after just feels really bad, right? And there's very few times where that's very relevant. However, with Merida, Formidable Archer, we are now able to sing strength and have the value always feel pretty good, because by definition, if you're singing it with Cinderella, if she survived to sing, and you play Merida afterwards, that strength is doing 2 damage for 2 characters and 2 extra damage for Merida being on board. So it's the equivalent of singing a He Hurled His Thunderbolt in most games, which is awesome. And then it also allows you to, so it just kind of opens up removal play lines with Merida. Whereas previously it was almost always ink until it arrived after 7 or 8 ink. He Hurled His Thunderbolt again. Now singing on curve can do 6 damage. This is very relevant for matchups like blue-green, where if they would play Donald Duck, Perfect Gentleman, you could, he's got 5 willpower, so getting rid of him was extremely hard. You'd have to play Tinkerbell and sing with Cinderella, or just ignore him. And so now being able to have 2 lines with Cinderella or Merida and Tinkerbell to get rid of something like him is great. And then even characters with 6 willpower, right? Being able to sing a He Hurled His Thunderbolt and to take out a Prince Philip, Vanquisher of Foes, right? He's 6/6. Being able to take out a Clarabelle, who's 5/6. Being able to take out a Hades Infernal Schemer, who's 3/6, because you're now doing 4+2 feels amazing. And we already talked about what else can I do, which is a really strong opening line where if you play Robin Hood, you shift Robin Hood on 3 ink, and then you immediately sing what else can I do. You're getting an extra card in your hand, you're getting an extra card in your inkwell, and you're protecting with ward, which allows you to go to a 5 ink play the turn after. Or if you sailed or T-Poed on turn 2 and you shifted Robin Hood when you had 4 ink, that allows you to play a 6-cost character the turn after, which effectively is the same as playing the Cinderella line, which is, kind of turns out as a weird 2/4/6, which is super cool. And then your late game will often include Goliath to activate as your draw engine, Ariel to help really close and finish off games, Ariel Sonic Warrior, who's one of my favorite characters in the game, and I've designed entire decks around her. But to be able to pay 2 ink to deal 3 damage to a chosen character every time you play a song, and so every song is just getting double value. And combined with Merida, you're just unleashing oppressive amounts of damage. And then, late game, you'll see recursion of the 3 arrows, right? So 3 arrows that you may or may not have used early in the game, or that got discarded with Beyond the Horizons or whatever else. You can now bring them back by retrieving them by playing future Meridas. And then, you're kind of playing them out as you have usually 9+ ink. One thing to keep in mind is that Ariel is probably your most preferred follow-up to Cinderella in a 2/4/6 line. Ariel just has so many things going for her, right? So Sonic Warrior 1 is extremely well statted, especially as a 6-cost. She's a 3 strength, she's 8 willpower, which on curve after Cinderella, which ideally you're playing Cinderella Dream Come True on your turn 3 after you ramped on turn 2. And so Ariel's coming out turn 4. So there's very, very, very few things in the game that can efficiently get rid of her that feels good at all. And then, she activates another Cinderella trigger, which allows you to, at the end of turn, ink to 7, which allows for the follow-up turn to go to 8 ink, which basically unlocks the rest of the game for you. And your hand is pretty healthy having gotten there. And now with Ariel, you can play another 6-cost or 5-cost character, sing a song, use her ink to pay 2 to do 3 extra damage, completely retake the board, and then really start snowballing the game from there. So Ariel is kind of your ideal follow-up after Cinderella whenever you're able to get away with it, and really just continues to prove why she's just such a standout in a list like this. And then the follow-ups with her, she activates as a strong foundation for characters like Merida, like Pete, Ghosts of Christmas Future. Now with Beyond the Horizon, one thing that is really important about a card like this, not only does it function as a great card to discard and punish your opponent's hands, but it also unlocks a really strong opener that only shift lines really allow, right? And so if you play your 1-drop Robin Hood on 1, play Tipo specifically on turn 2, and then when going to 4 ink on your turn 3, shifting Robin Hood, you have now Robin Hood, who's a 5 cost, and Tipo, who's a 2 cost, which together makes 7. So you can have on turn 3 Sing Beyond the Horizon, discarding both players' hands, and both players then draw 3. That early in the game, your opponent will probably have a pretty healthy hand, maybe 4 or 5 cards, sometimes rarely almost 6. And then you will have dumped most cards in your hand, especially if you're using Tipo, you're shifting, you ink that turn going to 4. And so that refills most of your hand and it devastates your opponent's opening hand, which you probably mulliganed and sculpted for. So that's a really, another really powerful thing that the Robin Hood shift line unlocks with Beyond the Horizon, where almost all other ramp and Ariel variant builds don't really get to capitalize on. Really thinking of this as more of a late game card, but Robin Hood does actually unlock this as an early game card, which is a really cool advantage. And then Casa Madrigal, which you're slamming downs later in the game to really help close the game as a source of lore gain that you don't need to quest for and is a little harder to remove. So this is the deck list, right? Archery class. And, can I give everyone a little, let's soak it in a little bit, right? So let's start off with discussing what's in the list. So we have 4 counts of Robin Hood. Now, if you've seen some of my other Sapphire Steel lists, you'll see that I really don't like 1-drops, right? When I try to play as little 1-drops as possible when I get the chance. Oftentimes I'll use Mulan, who's a 1-cost 2/1 that draws you a card and then discards a card. And, in most cases, I would run only 3 of her. But the shift line here is very relevant. And the shift line is a legitimate opener that we're sometimes aiming for, but at least wanting to have the option to appear in our hand. And so, whenever you think about a 4 counts of cards in a deck, you want 4 of a card that you are hoping shows up in your opening hand, right? Like that is what you are saying when you want 4 of a card. And so 4 Robin Hoods is very appropriate, and we want to maximize that opportunity for that shift line. Now here, right, is the kind of the rest of our primary opener, right? And so you have Tipo and Sail as your turn 2, optimal turn 2 plays. Even if you have Robin Hood, you still want to ideally play Tipo or Sail on turn 2, because that just allows your follow-up to Robin Hood to still be strong, relevant characters. Whether if you missed having What Else Can I Do to sing with Robin Hood, if you played your Tipo or Sail before you played Robin Hood, you'd still be able to play a 5-cost character the turn after. And so, you still want to play those if you can. Cinderella still functions as an extremely strong opener, and in most games, the 2-4-6 Cinderella ramp curve is still, your strongest opening with the most flexibility, especially with all the princesses in the list. But, again, to even have the option to take multiple pathways is very, very powerful. So we're excited for that. Now, there are no additional 4-drops to supplement the Cinderella, right? Like Angel, like Kita, like Belle, because we're kind of thinking of and treating Robin Hood as like an alternative 4-cost, quote unquote, or like another play line after you would open up with turn 2 ramp before like your real med game, which includes things like Pete's, Merida's, Ariel's, Moana's, etc. So our spread of 5 costs, right? So our 5-cost characters function as our flexible, like our flexible tech slots. It's not quite as flexible as in the Sonic Boom list. The Robin Hoods are kind of locked in. The Merida is also pretty integral to the build. And so, when you think about like cards you have to toy with, you're really looking at your Moana and your Pete. I do think like a Pete count at 2 or above is pretty necessary for a deck like this, because you want to hit a point where your draw is not 100% reliant on Goliath. But you also, he does a really cool job of that. His draw allows you to pick and choose what you get, and so you can keep picking those songs or 3 arrows or whatever else you're looking for. But Moana is just so cool because she really introduces a powerful form of value, but by inking from the discard. However, that's not like a absolute necessity, and so she is one that I'd consider it's easier to swap her in and out. But I think she clearly deserves a spot of at least 2 in the list, and she's really proven her worth in many games. Here's our spread of songs and relevant actions outside of the Sail. This is a lot of our removal suite We have 4 strength, 4 thunderbolt. You want to maximize all your removal songs that can capitalize off the Merida. We're putting 3 counts of what else can I do. 1, to help kind of close games, but 2, to really try to improve the consistency of that Robin Hood opener if you find it, right? And if it gets kind of stuck in your hand, worst case scenario, you can sing with it a little bit later and still get an Ariel trigger out of it, or you can plan to ink it with Tipo or Cinderella, worst case scenario. So I still think 2 Beyond the Horizons is extremely relevant and necessary in the current meta. You want to be able to hit hands, you want to be able to punish hands that are just holding on to board wipes, or people that draw too greedily. But then also it functions as a nice kind of burst draw. If you have characters on board and you sing with it, if you were lacking your Goliath or Pete. And then of course the 4 Casa Madrigals as a new win condition. It kind of takes the place of where Vincenzo Santorini was. He's the 7 cost inkable steel character that was 2 strength, 8 willpower, and quested for 3, deal 3 damage on play. And so, this 3 willpower really helped to close games. And so we're kind of swapping out that win condition with Casa Madrigal, and instead trying to stay a little bit low to the ground with more 5 drops, more 6 drops. There are no 7 drops. There's nothing higher than 6 cost in as far as characters go in this deck, right? And so no Hades, no Arthur, no Vincenzos. It's pretty new for most of my decks, right? And so this is really meant to stay in regards to establishing your singers and your fighters and your characters on a pretty low consistent curve, and then everything else in regards to singing and removing and then establishing your Casa Madrigals is meant to fill up the rest of kind of your ink usage. So what are some tech slots, right? Well, what can you consider swapping out if either your meta isn't really suited for the classic archery class list, or you keep running into problems that the list is maybe having a harder time or is not particularly designed to deal with, right? And so for 1-drops, right, again, a big point of the list is to run the Robin Hood shift line. It's kind of designed around that line. But, if you wanted to switch it up, right, the Omnidroid line is actually really good. This was also introduced in set 12, right? And so you have this 1-cost 2/2 Omnidroid version 8, and its shift line is Omnidroid version 10, right, which is a 6/6 quest for 2, and if he's a card under him, it gains resist 2, which would include a shift line if you shifted on it. Now that shifts on 4, Robin Hood shifts on 3, which in most games is pretty irrelevant because in most games you're still ramping with Sail or Tipo on turn 2. However, Robin Hood does allow you to where if you miss ramp, if you don't find Tipo or Sail, but you do have the line, you are still able to do a very strong turn 3 play. You're still able to ramp forward with what else can I do? And, and that's something that the Omnidroid line does not give you. So the Omnidroid, as a character in and of itself and as an established shift character, is a larger conventional threat, right? He's 6/6 quest for 2 with resist 2, right? So Robin Hood is a little easier to out, right? Robin Hood can be played around with Cheshire Cat, being 3 strength is a weakness. So a lot of characters with 4 willpower can kind of bully him out of the board if they really try, and he's kind of vulnerable to some of as I said, Cheshire Cat and moving damage around. But Omnidroid that's not the case. However, with Omnidroid, you run kind of the same deficits of a classic Sapphire Steel build, where you're kind of 100% banking on finding ramp on turn 2, whereas Robin Hood opens up if you miss that, the game is not over, and you have a play line that allows to continue to play smoothly, right? You could also consider supplementing 1 to 2 Mulans, maybe reduce Robin Hood down to 3, right? Or maybe adding 1 or 2 kind of Mulan's bonus. Mulan, she's actually a pretty relevant 1-drop. She activates a Cinderella trigger, right? She's a princess. And we actually have a really valuable discard card now in 3 arrows, right? Being able to discard the 3 arrows and keep it in the discard to be retrieved whenever we want later by a Merida is actually really nice. And so it doesn't feel bad at all getting rid of that. That includes when you're being forced to discard from a Mowgli, right? Man-bear cub, or man cub. Not man-bear, what am I saying? And so you can kind of just discard this 3 arrows. Oh no, you got rid of my 3 arrows, and then it chills out in your discard, which you can just kind of get back later. So as far as your 5-drops, right? As I said, I'd say Merida and Robin Hood are relatively locked, right? You can maybe consider, if you touch the 1-drop count, you can maybe consider bringing down the Robin Hood 5-drop count to 3. But unless you're you know, otherwise I would consider those pretty set. Now you could swap out the Moanas and Pete's if you're, you know, needing some item hate, right? You could consider Pluto, Steel Champion. You can consider Donald along for the ride. Pluto allows you to banish a item every time you play another Steel character, right? So that doesn't include himself. So usually you're not banishing the same turn you play him, but you get repetitive item hate. However, Donald along for the ride, he's you know, another 5 cost, 4/6 cost for 2. You know, he banishes a character, banishes an item when you play him immediately, right? So you get immediate item removal versus, like, you know, set up repetitive item removal. So you kind of take that for what you will. Other cards to consider, right, is Namari, Single-Minded Rival, who's just a really awesome, powerful 5 cost. She's a princess, so she has Cinderella trigger synergy. And she allows you to draw and discard, you know, when you play her and at the beginning of every turn. And she gets stronger for every card in your discard. So she's just a cool, powerful card that has good princess synergy. And then, you know, we have a new card, Bruno Madrigal, who allows you to, you know, once during your turn, whenever damage is healed off a character, moved off a character, then you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, right? Pick one, put in your hand, right? So basically very similar to Pete. And whenever he quests, he completely removes all damage from a character. So, you know, he allows your fighters like Tinkerbell or Robin Hood to keep challenging. And then, you know, you can heal them up and then effectively draw a card after you do that. So it's actually a pretty neat synergy. And I think it's a very valid tech to consider that's coming out in set 12. As far as the actions go, right? So, you know, your Strength of Raging Fires and Heroes Thunderbolts are pretty locked in. You can consider reducing your strengths if you feel like the consistency of having them come out is kind of annoying. You know, one very relevant card to consider would be Let It Go, which is another form of great removal. However, you know, the damage synergy with Merida is pretty nice, and Let It Go does give your opponent an ink. But it's just you just get rid of a character, which is convenient, right? So you could also consider swapping in a Mob Song, right? From my testing, I found that the build overall didn't quite need Mob Song in many cases. Mob Song is a 10 cost uninkable song that allows you to deal 3 damage up to 3 chosen targets, right? So it's one of the largest damage spreads that is accessible to steal. But, you know, in most games, right, utilizing 3 arrows strategically and kind of getting rid of characters on curve by, you know, shifting and singing, or using Merida and then singing with Cinderella, you know, Mob Song just didn't feel quite as necessary in many scenarios. As far as like Casa Madrigal and finishing the game, right, you can consider Keep the Ancient Ways. It's a song, so it synergizes with Ariel, Sonic Warrior. And, you know, when you play that card, your opponent can't play actions or items until your next turn. So they can't play board wipes, you know, they can't play like relevant items to gain lore. And so, you know, great great card. Casa Madrigal just, you know, feels overall a little bit more consistent in regards to how the deck kind of plays out. But Keep the Ancient Ways is an excellent card, especially if you have a lot of like blue-yellow or blue-green in your meta. And then there's a new card, Ranger Plane, which is a 3-cost item that comes out in Sapphire that gives all your characters support as long as it's on the board, which 1 is actually very powerful. But 2, the other effect is kind of taking the effect of Alice Growing Girl, who, where, you know, you can exert this card and a character that's 10 strength or more just gets 3 more lore this turn, right? So that's why you can, so you can use it, give everyone support, have everyone support 1 character, right? So now they're at like 10 plus strength, and then you can activate its ability, give that 10 strength character 3 more lore, and then bada boom, you know, they're questing for 3 extra, right? And so, and with characters like Pete and Goliath, you know, getting someone above 10 strength is really not that hard. So really good other alternative to Casa Madrigal, but a lot of the deck, you know, like Merida, like Robin Hood, like Ariel, are kind of floating around that 3 strength count. So, you know, it's not the most consistent way to trigger Ranger Plane. So, you know, I felt Casa Madrigal made a little bit more sense. Now let's talk about Mulligan Strategies and what you want to do. Again, mulliganing is sort of crafting your hand and picking and choosing the cards you want to keep, and then deciding the cards you want to send back before you start the game with 7 cards, right? And so, you know, the general, when you're playing into the blind, right, on OTP means on the play. And so when you're playing in the blind, you know, there's kind of 2 major lines to think about, right? So there's the Robin Hood shift line, where you want to prioritize having your Robin Hood shift. You want your 1-drop right? You want your 5-drop. You know, ideally you want to have a what else can I do, which is that Wicked, right? Have another 5 to 6 cost follow-up, right? So like a Goliath or a Moana after you get to play the Robin Hood, shift, sing, and then, you know, you want to follow up with a really good form of card advantage, right? Moana can, you know, ink the sail that you played earlier, or, you know, the Goliath can start setting up your draw engine, and then just inkable cards after that, right? So your second play line is your classic 2-4-6 line, right? So this is playing a ramp card on turn 2, playing Cinderella on turn 3, and then playing, you know, just one of your great 6-cost inkables, or 6-cost cards, right? You know, like a Goliath or an Ariel. In most case scenarios, if you can get away with establishing the Ariel, you try to, and then follow up with Goliath like the turn after. And so this will always be a strong and just generically good opener, right? And then in a perfect world, if you can get away with holding a Thunderbolt to sing with that Cinderella, you know, you try to. So this is kind of the general progression of priorities in regards to keeping things in your hand, you know, starting with having the turn 2 ramp, having the Cindy, and then, you know, everything else kind of afterwards. So, you know, what are some like example mulligans, right? So let's say that you open up with this hand, right? And so we have our turn 2 ramp, we have sail. We actually have 2 choices. We have sail or Tipo, so we kind of get our pick, which is sort of nice. We have our Robin Hood shift line, and in fact, we have our Robin Hood shift line, and what else can I do? So we actually have our Robin Hood shift line with the ability to continue inking and ramping, and we even have a draw follow-up with Pete, right? So this is a perfect hand, right? We keep everything here. And so, you know, one could maybe argue sending back the 3 arrows, you know, because in case you don't want to ink it that early. But yeah, I would just keep this because it is inkable and it's a safe ink, right? So let's look at this hand, right? You know, we have our Robin Hood. Okay, we have our 1 cost. We don't have the shift line. We have our sail, right? And then, you know, we have a smattering of higher cost characters. We have Ariel, we have Merida, we have the Thunderbolt, and we have the big uninkable and beyond, right? So what kind of feels best here, you know? And so in most scenarios, right, we have one part of the shift line, but it's normally reasonably worth it to keep that one part along with your turn 2 sail, right? Especially if you're on the play. Worst case scenario, you can ink the Robin Hood, and in fact, because this is sail and gives you a draw, if you would play it on turn 2, that gives you even another chance to find your shift line, and then still play the Robin Hood that same turn, right, before you do the turn where you'd shift him anyway, right? And so I would keep both with the odds that, you know, you're bound to find either Cinderella, right, or the Robin Hood 5 cost. So what about here, right? So we see that we have one of our openers. We have Sail, we have Cinderella, okay? And in fact, we even have some really good 6 cost follow-ups, right? So what feels best to send back and keep, right? So we have our 2-4-6 line. I would just keep all of it. The Robin Hood could function as ink, and in fact, he'd probably be my first ink here. And then, you know, we could kind of keep our suite of any of our follow-ups to Cinderella. Tinkerbell, Ariel, Merida. Merida actually is really interesting here because we could play Merida after Cindy, and we could sing with the strength to take out most relevant targets, which again was not an option historically. Yeah, so by keeping the Merida, you know, the strength is effectively a he, her, does Thunderbolt. So what about this opener, right? This is a little trickier, right? We have no turn 2 ramp, but we have everything else around the turn 2 ramp, right? We have the 1 cost Robin Hood, we have the Cinderella. So what would I commonly recommend here? I would effectively just treat this hand as if we just missed turn 2 ramp, and I would just keep Cinderella, right? And so in most games, right, the Cinderella, and if you find the turn 2 ramp with Tipo or Sail, will create a stronger opener and more consistent game than finding the Robin Hood and banking on one. Hopefully you find turn 2 ramp to pair with him. It's not necessary, but it's nice. But then hoping to find the Robin Hood shift, and then also hoping you find the what else can I do, or a Cinderella to follow up Robin Hood if you don't find either, right? Because if you play Robin Hood and you shift him on 3 and you didn't find turn 2 ramp, then you're going into 4 ink and you then have no real good play on 4 ink. unless you had Cinderella anyway, right? And so, and if you didn't get to sing, what else can I do? And so having the Robin Hood is still a nice, strong body, but you still want to get to the real part of your game, which is a deck like this. You want to get to 6 ink, 7 ink, 8 ink. You want to be establishing your major threats like Ariel, like Goliath, like Merida, like Tinkerbells. And, that allows you the breathing room to play Casa Madrigals, to close the game and play your songs. And so, ultimately ramping and inking and getting ahead to that point is still a major priority. And so if you only have one of the two and you don't have any other easy lead in like the turn 2 ramps, I would keep the Cinderella in hopes of just getting the 2-4-6 line, which has less combo components to make successful than the Robin Hood line. So what about this hand, right? Now we have enough of our combo pieces here that I would simply, right, keep the Robin Hood shift opener, right? So we have our 1-cost Robin Hood, we have our 5-cost Robin Hood, and we have what else can I do? Now, interestingly, if this hand did not have what else can I do, I would really, really consider sending all of it back and keeping only Cinderella, fishing for that 2-4-6 line, right? You could do either or. You could still keep the Robin Hood, keep the Robin Hood shift line, and keep the Cinderella, right? And then you could go, 1-cost Robin Hood, let's say you didn't find turn 2 ramp, ink, pass, play the shift line, and then play Cinderella. That's still fine too. So there's a lot of ways to approach this. If you have the what else can I do, I think you keep that as the preferred opener. You don't want to keep 2 uninkables here. But if you didn't have it, you would either keep Cinderella or just keep Cinderella, send everything back, and kind of go for the 2-4-6. So there's a lot of, but this kind of, again, speaks to the strength of the deck and, its ability to be flexible in your early lines. So with this hand, this is a really interesting hand. And as we kind of talked about earlier, this hand is really tempting to just keep your Robin Hood, your Tipo, and, your shift Robin Hood, and go for the shift line, maybe look for Cinderella. But in all honesty, this is a hand that I would actually recommend completely keeping. This, if you're on the play, opens up one of the most powerful openers that a shift line build like this can present, which is you play 1-drop Robin Hood, you play Tipo on turn 2, and that gets you to 3 ink at the end of that turn. And then on turn 3, you can ink to 4, and you can shift Robin Hood, and with both 5-cost Robin Hood and Tipo, you can now sing together Beyond the Horizon, which allows you to select both players to discard their hands for 3, discard their hands and draw 3 cards. And if you're on the play, your opponent on the draw has more cards than you and has not been really given the chance to get rid of as many cards, especially if they're not playing blue, right? So they're maybe stuck with more cards. And so it allows you to dump sometimes 4 to 6 cards in their hand, resets the preferred opening that they were sculpting their hand for with their mulligan, and completely refills your hand. And so you're really keeping all the other cards, like the 3 arrows, the Sonic Warrior, the other Robin Hood here, just to ink as inkables, to go for this really unique but powerful opener. Now, this opener is a little more vulnerable because if they do play Ursula, Deceiver, or Mowgli, Baraka, Mancub, to discard this Beyond the Horizon in your hand, you're really kind of hurting because you're burning a lot of your hand to set up for this. But they have to do that pretty fast. They only really get 1 turn to respond, which is their turn 2. So they kind of have to have one of those cards. And if they don't, it's too late because it comes out way too fast, which is a powerful thing that this Robin Hood opener can specifically do. Okay, so what about here, right? This is a pretty easy full send. We send it all back, right? We didn't find any part of our Robin Hood shift line. We didn't find Cinderella. We didn't find any turn 2 ramp. There's no opener here. This is a dead hand, and we just need to hope for any of our relevant openers for the full 7 send. Okay, so, what about this opener, right? Now here, I think it's very, very reasonable to just keep the Robin Hood. It's, again, whether it's the 1-cost Robin Hood or the 5-cost Robin Hood, it ultimately doesn't matter that much. The 1-cost Robin Hood is not actually that relevant of a 1-cost play outside of threatening the shift line. He's a 1/3. Yeah, he may get in 1 or 2 lore, but, he'll be disrupted extremely quickly. But, so, treating either of them sort of the same in hands that you draw in regards to thinking of the opener, right, of the shift line opener, I think they're pretty equivalent. And so here, if you have no other combo components, I would send it all for the Robin Hood. Now, interestingly, I would actually recommend not keeping the What Else Can I Do here, because it is a little on the risky side. Unlike Cinderella, where you can play her with like no real setup at all, right? And just play her with 4 ink or whatever else ink afterwards. She will get an ink for you. She will get a draw for you, right? At the end of that turn. What Else Can I Do is a little clunkier as an uninkable. It's an uninkable song, and a lot of its value comes from actually being sung, right? It only gets the warded ability if you sing it, right? And so, if you send like everything and you keep that and the Robin Hood and you don't find that 1-cost Robin Hood, which is possible, then you're sort of, you can ink big Robin Hood, which feels totally fine, right? But you're kind of just stuck with this What Else Can I Do for a long while, hoping that it doesn't like brick you and is just clunkier to have if you don't have the setup, right? And so I think it's board is a little bit on the risky side, and I would, kind of be a little bit greedier and just fish for something that's a little bit more consistent. Every game's a little different, depending on my mood. There may be some games where I keep it, but in general. So mulligan on the draw. Now, like in my opinion, the perfect world mulligan on the draw would be having turn 2 ramp, having Cindy, having the Robin Hood shift line, right? So having basically all openers with the exception of What Else Can I Do, and then having like a follow up to your ramp lines and just inkable cards, right? Because again, in your opening hand, a lot of cards just end up being ink. Now on the draw, you get 1 extra card, which is nice in regards to ink resource utilization. And so, having something like this, there's a very real possibility you could just play a lot of it out, right? Because of that 1 extra card. Now, again, on the draw, into the blind, you don't know what you're playing against. This is the perfect hand because we have access to all openers. We could fight the board early with Robin Hood by shifting and kind of fighting early questers and following up with Cindy after that. We could just do 2-4-6 Cindy. We could establish Robin Hood and establish Cindy, right? So there's just so much flexibility with this hand. This is the perfect hand. So what about here, right? So again, we have our 1-cost Robin Hood. We have our shift line. We have a very interesting potential here. What I would actually do is keep both 1-drop Robin Hoods, keep both songs, because it is extremely difficult to actually get rid of 2 shift lines on curve for most decks, right? Basically like playing Fire the Cannons twice or playing Fire the Cannons and doing an early Angel if you ramped on 2 as blue steel is probably like one of the only realistic ways of getting rid of 2 shift lines. Like if you played Robin Hood on 1, played the second Robin Hood on 2, one of them is going to be alive to shift on. And then because you're on the draw, you have 1 extra card to play with. And so, playing both of them doesn't feel too bad. You can still ink and play them. And then because you get that 1 extra card on the draw, it doesn't feel as bad keeping some of these uninkables like a Thunderbolt and the What Else Can I Do, which then allows you the flexibility of when you do shift, right, to either ramp and protect yourself with ward and draw, maintain that card advantage, or shift and sing Thunderbolt, right, and just get rid of a key character in regards to their early strategy while they're on the play, right? And so having that flexibility with that shift line and be able to shift and sing is one of the strongest ways to take a game back when you're on the draw. And so I think this is a hand where I would be reasonably greedy. I would keep the entirety of the shift line with both 1-drops, and then I would actually keep both these songs. There's actually a very reasonable play line here where you can just keep the Moana and the 3 arrows and treat them as ink, right? I think that's appropriate too. But I think you can, on the draw, you can afford to be greedy here, and hopefully you find turn 2 ramp, and so I think it's okay to send them. So what do our matchup spread look like? So this kind of follows the general trajectory of Sapphire Steel matchup spreads. You have the favorable matchups, which are pretty consistent. Sapphire Steel, Amethyst Steel, Amethyst Ruby, right? Red Purple, and Amber Ruby. And so this is kind of a weird rush. This probably has an asterisk on it. So 1, Amber Ruby now includes toys, and toys is a unique form of aggro deck where they kind of try to spit out a lot of young small characters. They can do damage reduction, and they get a lot of benefit by challenging, but it's a deck that really suffers to steal removal, and especially when you can get it out early, like with shift lines and Merida triggers with 3 arrows. And so, it kind of just will commonly fall apart to a deck like this. Now, the boost control build can be a little bit more annoying. However, with the introduction of Casa Madrigals, and, allows a lot more protection against Raging Storm builds. But then also, again, utilize those shift lines, you can deal with Scrooges really efficiently before they ever start boosting. And so, honestly, both red, yellow builds feel pretty good. Purple Steel for most Blue Steel builds feels pretty free. You have to be a little bit more careful with the Robin Hood Lions because he could get punished by Cheshire Cat or like Calhoun's and Captain Hooks, right? So singing like that early does not feel quite as free. And then we have the neutral matchups, which I would say are relative 50-50s. They 50-50 is the wrong way to say it. I can say they just as commonly go your way in your favor or feel unfavorable depending on like the hands you got, the hands they got, and the lines they particularly went, and the tech slots that either deck trialed out, right? And so again, what historically really bad matchups like blue-yellow feel a little bit better with Casa Madrigal and playing a little bit lower to the ground. You're spitting out more characters more early. You're getting advantage, right? Like, what else can I do? Protecting you from Hades and Let It Goes. And so things that blue-yellow usually employs to oppress blue-steel, this build feels a little bit better about. And then you can continue to gain lore value if they Raging Storm and clear the board. Blurple feels, again, this is always kind of like a relative 50-50 like skill matchup in my opinion. Having what else can I do can really help swing board states. And then having the sheer amount of oppressive removal allows you to kind of swing backboards that they may try to get back. And then being able to get rid of Demonas by just singing Bolt feels amazing too. Amber Steel, I'd say conventionally is pretty favored for Blue Steel, but a big part of swinging board states in Amber Steel, especially the Steel Song variant, historically has relied on having some of our 7-drops, right? Like being able to play Hades and just getting rid of Powhatan, being able to play like Vincenzo and just getting rid of Angel, and establishing a major body threat. That's not as much of a thing with this build, right? Clearly, because we don't have the 7-drops. And so it's a little trickier and a little less smooth, and becomes a war of singing. So you have to just be aware of that. Yellow Purple as well, they will employ a lot of Raging Storm board wipe builds. However, their ability to disrupt singers by exerting and freezing characters is a lot more consistent and frustrating to deal with, and a lot of rush characters to punish singers. And so it's a little different than like yellow, blue, and red, yellow. And it can really kind of feel either way. Yellow, green, dogs always feels kind of up in the air. What else can I do gives us a really cool way to get around Emerald Chronicon, right? And so, but you have to be wary of holding it in your hand because you can get punished by Ursula or Mowgli's, so it doesn't feel super consistent. Being able to fight early ladies, right? And just even playing the 1-drop Robin Hood will just usually prevent early lore because they don't want to risk you having the shift line. And then, it just kind of turns into a typical like Sonic Boom, Ariel, song, 3 arrows damage removal style. We're just going to try to deal with them while questing yourself. And then Sapphire Steel, I'd say, every Sapphire Steel mirror match feels kind of just up in the air on who's going to win, right? And so, whoever gets their singers first, I'd say that, with what else can I do, then the shift line, you have the potential to feel like you can have stronger openers, but, having the shift line also introduces more potential bad top decks, right? Like top decking a one-drop Robin Hood doesn't feel great. So there's less of those big bodies like Hades and Vincenzo's that really swing mirror matches. So again, I consider it neutral. Green purple will never feel good, right? They have access to Snowfort, they have access to evasives, they have access to multiple board wipes, and so if they open up with Webby, it just feels kind of bad, and it doubly feels bad because a 1-drop Robin Hood shifting still cannot kill Webby, which is a major weakness of his. So they still kind of get away with murder if they open up with Webby, and then they just kind of like if they get their Snowfort set up or Prince Philip setups, it's can feel pretty frustrating. And then blue-green will also never feel good as blue-steel. Clarabelle openers are just very oppressive. You have to have very specific openers to counter them. And if they go first, they'll get to sing first, and you won't even get the chance to answer with Cinderella singing Bolt with Merida. And so, and if they get that first Clarabelle, you're welcome setup, you know, crawling your way back and then fighting through ink geysers and stuff, and then dealing with Prince Philip board wipes is very hard. You know, Casa Madrigal makes the Prince Philip board wipe feel a little less bad, but he can also just board wipe and then still challenge and deal with the Casa Madrigal, so it doesn't feel quite as good as against like Raging Storm. So what's an example of like a play line that the deck may experience, right? So here's an example against dogs, yellow-green, Amber Emerald. So we would open up with Robin Hood. They could start with Lady, right? Very common opener. We would sail, ramp, get to 3 ink. Very common openers, they'd open up with like a Grandma Willow, and then because she reduces the cost of your next character, you can just play like a Bobby Zimmerowski, draw and discard, you know, getting rid of that, maybe that Under the Sea out of their hand that they don't want, setting up their tramp. Now here, which allows kind of the strength of the build, right? So we shift Champion of Sherwood, and we get rid of the Grandma by singing He Hurled His Thunderbolt immediately, taking out their ability to play 7-drop Champ the next turn. So they follow up with their backup plan. They play Nani, right? And they maybe find a character. They're just trying to build up their board, allowing them to maybe sing Under the Sea, you know, just kind of making the tramps cheaper by setting up more characters. So we can now follow up with playing like a Cinderella, right? And also singing What Else Can I Do? Protecting our characters, drawing. We're now ramping a whole bunch, right? So we've now inked twice additionally on top of inking for turn, and then keeping our hand nice and healthy. So we're using this turn to kind of set up again. They get to play their tramp, as is predictable, still hoping to get their big Under the Sea line or something to really impact our board. But now, we, because everything was protected with ward, they had no real way to do anything to our board. And so, and because Robin Hood's so chunky, right, you know, how do they really deal with him? Even like a little tramp wouldn't be able to, you know, Street Smart Dog wouldn't even really deal with the Robin Hood because of his 6 willpower. So now we can play our Merida, sing Bolt again, get rid of the tramp because it now does 6 damage. So with their main game plan disrupted, they now only really have one hope, which is to establish Emerald Chronicon, play as many characters as they can, quest out, and hope that them sending your characters back after banishing and you know, will slow us down fast enough to close the game, right? However, our follow-up with Merida is we can sing What Else Can I Do, giving our entire board ward, establish a follow-up plan like Pete, and then allow us to let loose our removal and essentially close the game, right? And so we can play the 3 arrows to take out the readied characters, which now does bonus 2 damage because we have Merida on board doing 4 and 3, taking out those 2 ladies. And then we can have Cinderella take out the Bobby Zimmerowski. We can have the Robin Hood take out the lady, gaining even 2 lore in the process. And all he's left with is this Nani, alone and with no real recourse to recoup the game in any way whatsoever. And we have a dominating board that will continue to, you know, just go unchecked, right? So this is not an unusual game at all going into, you know, many builds, but like even like dogs. And this build has all the tools to create board states like this, in large part because of the flexible openers and the different ways to, you know, snowball board states, whether it's with removal, special tech like What Else Can I Do, or, you know, just kind of the lower to the ground mid-range style of the build. And so in conclusion, right, Archery class has just these awesome fan favorite characters, bringing back a beloved card in Champion of Sherwood as powerful removal, a flexible array of openers, follow-ups, and removal tools for a pretty wide meta, which set 11 established a wide meta and set 12 follows up on. A great mix of play lines and just really fun, engaging card synergies, right? We didn't even talk about a lot of the Ariel setups here, right? We didn't really have time. And so, you know, and then once you kind of establish Ariel, it just feels like the cream on top, right? And so you have Merida, you have Ariels, and you're just unleashing endless waves of barrages of damage. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, share, subscribe. If you play this list, comment. I'd love to hear changes you make, feedback, and how it does. And I hope someone carries this to set champs and gets that W. You know, I know I plan to. So till next time, guys, appreciate you. May you be blessed, and You know how it is here. Take it easy.